Welcome to What a Word is Worth. This is a space for creative minds to speak about viable ways to heal the world through writing and other inventive mediums. This is your host, Marianela Medrano. I am the founder of Palabra Center, where words are giving us medicine. And today, my guest is a sister. I recently found her, but she is a true sister, Nana Brew Hammond. She is the author of Powder Necklace and Blue, and I am totally in love with Blue. And she also writes poetry and essays. So welcome, Nana.
Thank you so much for having me. And I just want to say that I love the name of your podcast. That is such a beautiful way of just kind of, I don't know, tapping into the power of writing and, words. So I don't know, maybe I'm biased because I'm a writer, but I love it.
But it's that idea, right? That there is a lot of worth in words. So okay, speaking of that, do you subscribe to the idea, the core idea behind this podcast, that words and writing are healing balms, I said? And how young did you discover that, if you say yes, of course?
Yes, absolutely. I subscribe to the idea that words are so powerful, and words, I mean, we often talk about how words can hurt and harm, but I love that your focus is on healing.
Mhm.
And I absolutely feel that writing is something that heals in so many different ways, and we'll talk about that, I'm sure, as we get into it. But yeah, when I was a kid, for me, writing was very healing, just to, be able to just put things down on paper that I was thinking or feeling. And also reading. Reading was incredibly healing to me. I didn't often find like books that were about people like me, but even just escaping into some other world and just connecting and learning and having, it felt like I had this like portal into another world. And so that was incredibly healing as a kid for me. So yeah.
Finding those books. So let's talk more about that, the not finding, because that's an experience that marked me as well, not finding resemblance in the characters that I was reading as a kid. And actually, I started writing children's literature because I didn't want my son to have the same experience. So tell me more about realizing or not finding you, and when did that change for you?
It's so funny because I think when you're a kid, you're not necessarily processing it in that way, or I didn't. It was more like I just accepted, sadly, that like, oh, on television, in books, in movies, I wasn't going to see a Black person, or if I did see a Black person, it was going to be a very specific type of Black person, either a comedian or, I don't know, something, a very sort of stereotypical kind of role. And I remember, I think maybe the Cosby Show was one of the things that was really big growing up for me when I was growing up. And I remember wanting to be an obstetrician gynecologist because I don't know. And like looking back, I'm like, I'm very squeamish. I hate the sight of blood, but I would just be like, yes, I'm going to be pre-med because I had that to, that was something that I saw.
Yeah.
But I think what was interesting for me is that one, I think that when I was reading books that did not resemble myself, I still kind of took those stories to be something that could plausibly be my own. Now, the negative part of it is so I would write because I was like, oh, I want to recreate the story. I know I can do this. And the sad thing is, when I was very young, I would write stories and it would always be about a white character.
Mm.
And I remember one time, I don't know if someone asked me or I was asking myself, but I was like, why am I always writing it? And this was like by the time I was in college. And then I remember thinking, and I remember my answer was, oh, but white people have so much more color. Like they've got red hair, they've got this, they've got that. And then I realized, wait a minute, like, no, like, and that was, I think it was in college that I really began to interrogate why I just had this sort of natural, like, oh, if I'm going to write, because those were the stories that were sort of embedded in my brain. So that was like a big shift for me. And I ended up studying political science and Africana studies. So
Woke up.
yeah, exactly. Basically, I woke up.
Wow, yes. And you know what I'm thinking? Yes, it is true. The awareness doesn't come until much later. What I remember, and I think you and I spoke about this in a previous conversation, feeling the sense of deficit or the sense of I'm not okay based on the characters and how they were depicted, and I didn't have the qualities. So, but at the same time, that's the blessing, right? Like it does something to you, then it little by little awakens then the need to then come out. I think your character does that.
Yeah, I think that's so true. I think, and it's so funny because yeah, there's like this sort of innate feeling that like there's something wrong. Like my life doesn't look that way. My family is not set up that way. My school doesn't look like that. So therefore I am less than. And I think everybody deals with it differently. And I think that for me as a kid, yeah, I definitely felt like, whoa, I don't see myself. And the interesting thing for me was that when I did see a Black character, I was like, this is amazing. But what I would find is that it was a certain kind of Black character. And I was like, there's so much more to like, because I'm like growing up in a neighborhood where my neighbors are from Panama and from, Jamaica and from all of these different places. And I'm like, okay, I don't see that story either. And so that was something that, I wanted to expose myself more to. And that ended up happening too, when I like went to college and realized like, oh, there's Caribbean literature, there's African literature, and it's funny too, because I say all of this and my parents, like my dad, especially, he had like Aikwe Arma's, The Beautiful Ones Are Not Yet Born in our bookcase, but for whatever reason, those books didn't call me. And it was only like, I feel like, again, college, I came back home once and I'm like, whoa, you have all these books here and I didn't even notice them.
Well, we all want to belong, right? And if the narrative is this, so we want to lean on that. And yeah, that's what being socialized. But let's go to your children's book, Blue, which, as I said, it truly enchanted me. It's such a beautiful book and such a beautiful rendition. Both, as I said to you, the images and also what you did with taking information that could be dry, even though what you talk about in the book is fascinating, but there is a risk of the material being dry. That doesn't happen in the book at all. So tell us about the process, the birth of this book. How did you get to, why the interest in the color blue?
Yeah, it's so it's so funny because yeah, when I think back to the whole, like even pitching the book, and I remember being like, I was just so fascinated by what I learned, and how it all came to be is one day I was just reading the Bible, and it mentioned that there was the temple furnishings in King Solomon's temple, and it mentioned that there was a blue curtain or a blue veil, actually blue, red, and purple. And when I saw the color blue, I said, why does it matter? Why are you mentioning blue? So as I was reading, I was on my phone, and I just kind of just started Googling around, and I saw that I came across a weird tidbit that there was a snail in antiquity that was used to, that was harvested to create blue dye. And I said, what? That doesn't even make any sense. So I was like, maybe Google is just making stuff up. So I found a book. It's called The Rarest Blue by a couple. It's called, they're Baruch and Judy Sturman. And it's a fascinating account of the history of the color blue, but it delves a lot into this snail, because the snail is very important in Judaism, and it was used to dye sort of different vestments that are used by the priests and whatnot. So I said, oh my goodness. And so then a friend of mine, her name is Catherine McKinley, she had written a book called Indigo, about her time researching the history of indigo and its impact in Africa, in West Africa specifically. And so I had read the book already. So I said, wait a minute, let me go back to her book again. And so I reread that book, and I was just like, oh my goodness. And I just couldn't stop. So I started gathering as much information as I could. And I was just so bowled over by the history. And that's really what it was just in my head. And I said, wow, kids need to know about this. And so I just wrote a poem. I wrote a poem to myself, and I laugh now because I wrote it sort of in the voice of like a boozy auntie. I was like, I'm going to be like an auntie telling my nieces and cousins' children like about this. And so I wrote this funny poem, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. And I said, kids really need to know this. And so I pitched it to my agent at the time, and they said, oh, this is so cool. So then we they gave me some notes on it, and then, time passed. We ended up parting ways, not because of anything, but because we were working on something else, and it just didn't come to fruition. And so I pitched a bunch of children's book agents. And then one got back to me and said, this is amazing. We need to tweak this and tweak that and make it more, because I'd never written a children's book. And then I did it, and then he sold it. And that's the story.
And I'm so glad he did, because again, it's a gorgeous book, but I just opened one of my favorite pages here. And one thing that a recurring theme that I see in you is your preoccupation for history and for telling history the right way and the social aspect. So on this page, which is so beautiful, do you have the book with you?
I do. Let me grab it from my bookcase.
Okay.
Yeah, I love that page as well.
Yes, because I want you, the image is gorgeous, and we'll talk more about the illustrator and that relationship. But do you mind really reading those two?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll read that page. So it says, we feel blue when we're sad, perhaps because the people who had to dig, grind, and grow passed down their painful memories of working the mines or of slavery on indigo plantations. Africans enslaved in America sang prayers that sounded like tears. The songs were called spirituals, and they inspired a style of music called the blues, originally known for its aching words and melodies.
So beautiful. So much poetry in the telling, right? And that's what fascinates me about the book, how something that could be, very matter of fact, you just dress it up. in such a beautiful way. The images, I mean, I remember, do you remember how crazy I got when I first saw your book?
Yeah.
The illustrations. How do you feel every time you look at these illustrations?
It's so funny because, you as a writer, most of the time, this is my first children's picture book. So I've never written with the idea that it was going to be illustrated. And so when I got the first few images came in through my editor, I was in tears. When I saw this particular image, the one that's on, I think, page 2,
Yes.
of the girl's hands cupping the water,
Yes.
I just said, oh my goodness, because I didn't know what to expect. And it just brought tears to my eyes. And
Yeah.
I think the whole book, you can just see that the illustrator just brought such intense passion to each page. And each image just sings. It's beyond my wildest imagination. And because I had sat with the book for a long time before, because it's a long process with children's book publishing, or at least in my experience it was. And in my mind, I had envisioned it being more about like watercolor, because I thought like there's so many shades of blue, and it's, I talk a lot about the water. And so I envisioned it to be sort of in that vein. And what he produced is so much richer and so much deeper and so much fuller. And we did not collaborate, because in children's book land, which I didn't know about, we each work separately. And so he just had the words and he interpreted it himself. But what I began to notice is that there is a sense of water in the sort of, that's a subtle feeling on some of the pages. And so there's just something so powerful about the connection that we didn't even have until we've only spoken about the process together once.
It's unbelievable, because there is such a correspondence, such fluidity, right, between the images and the writing, that is amazing. And then you have told me you have taken this book, you have worked with children, and they really get into the experience. What are the most common themes, the most common questions that children bring up?
It's funny, because I don't know that there are, one of the things that boys of a certain age often bring up is the fact that lapis lazuli, which I talk about in the book, is in Minecraft. So in the video game Minecraft. So that is funny to me, because they're like, yes, it's the desert, it's rare, they use it as charms. And I'm like, this is amazing. They've made this.
Like, don't you know this?
I mean, so I love that. But it's what I find is that depending on the age group, because I speak to kids from kindergarten through 5th grade. So obviously that's a big, there's a big gap in what they and how they comprehend the book. Younger kids tend to quickly associate, like, oh, well, that's blue, that's blue, that's blue. And then it seems as if for them, like, the world comes alive, like all the blue around them comes alive to them in a different way. They really like, one of the things they really like is the snail, this idea that there's a snail that can be harvested. They also think it's funny that that part of the process of making indigo requires urine. So they're like, oh my goodness, urine, pee. So, they have a chuckle about that. So in essence, I think for the younger kids, they are very sort of fascinated by the production of the color. The older kids are very sort of perturbed and saddened by all of the sort of brutality that has been part of the production. One young lady said to me, I mean, so do you mean to tell me that just so that we could have a color, people were, enslaved and people were, brutalized? And it was really, it was funny because when we left, the parent, who was a friend of mine that, helped me set up that event, said to me, well, her mom is a lawyer, so she's gonna, she's very, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. But so many, I mean, a lot of kids talk about that. Like a lot of the like 4th and 5th graders, they're just disturbed by the brutality of it. And yeah.
And that's the importance, right? To create these things, and especially, I mean, because children are so capable and because they can see these things, it's important to write this kind of literature for them, that you're not watering things down or dumbing it down, because they catch it, as you said. So let's jump to Powder Necklace, and your main character, Lila, who delights us with what I call a very spirited voice. The world, or as she shows to us, is sometimes very opaque and then bright at the same time. Like, at least that's the reading I'm getting. That this character is giving me alternative ways to look. When I examine, though, the emotional fabric you unfold in this novel, I see collective trauma. For specifically one, the loss of fathers throughout the world, actually. Her father, for a great part of the read, is just the voice on the other side that she's not always able to access, and sometimes has to sneak around to access the voice. And then we also have the conflicted relationship with her and her mother, but that's separate. I want to stay with the idea of the lost father. And at the end, when you finish writing this novel, were you aware of what I'm saying? And do you agree that this is, the big theme here with the father is, a traumatic thread that goes through so many, histories and peoples throughout the world? Were you aiming at that, or am I? Well, I have the freedom, right? To
Yes.
whatever I want about.
That's right. It's funny. I wasn't thinking about that, wasn't at the forefront. I think what I was thinking more of was this idea of the trauma of not having an open communication. So the secrets or the barriers to a free-flowing communication that leaves everyone misunderstood or not understood at all. And so I think for this young lady, she is living with her mother and not understanding, one, what her mother is going through, two, why her mother chooses to present the world to her in that way, why her mother constricts her in certain ways. And then she doesn't know why she can't access her father, but she understands sort of instinctively
that she has to do something.
Exactly. And I think that so on one hand, there's something like that speaks to, I guess, our collective ability to survive, to push through, to find our way, right? But there's also this there's a sadness that if it was handled differently, I think everyone would feel much freer if it was handled differently, but it wasn't. And so I think that is something that is there. So, and there's, I think culturally, I remember just growing up often hearing this kind of, I don't know if this is something that's unique to Ghana, but it was, children are to be seen and not heard.
Yes.
And so,
Yes.
yeah, it's
Very
something that's,
common.
yeah, in many cultures. Yeah. And so this idea that, something is going on, but if to ask a question about it is to be disrespectful, is to be rude, is to be,
Yeah.
and that keeps going because it's something obviously that the parents have also been told and
Right.
socialized into. And so there's this kind of pain that keeps going down each generation, and no one is able to talk about it for fear of breaking some code. And so therefore there's a lot of woundedness that happens that is not being addressed. And then you just kind of live with it, and you live with those scars, and ultimately that hurts. You end up hurting other people around you because you haven't tended to your own pain.
Absolutely. And again, there is so much in the emotional fabric that you display, that, the intergenerational trauma that gets passed down. But the other thing, if we were to lift up Lila's pain, what we're gonna find is abandonment. If we lift up her mother's pain, there is abandonment there too. So abandonment is one of the most troublesome markers in relationships. And we come from relational mindset, you and I. So how big is the size of this trauma that we're talking about from your perspective?
I mean, it's funny. I mean, I haven't actually thought about it in those stark of terms, but I think that's very true what you're saying. I think that one of the things that's interesting, I think, about the book is that the abandonment is different. It's not, when we think of abandonment, classic abandonment is I left you somewhere, I threw you somewhere, and I did that. But what you've brought up that makes me think is that there's so many ways that you can abandon someone.
Absolutely.
You can be physically present and abandon someone, right? And so, and I think about the fact that, like, in this particular instance, this girl is being abandoned in the sense of being sent to a culture that she is not intimate with because she hasn't grown up in it. And then she's further sent to a school where she's on her own. And that happens to so many, to so many kids and to so many people. And some of it is part of the cultural fabric. And it's meant with good intention, right? Like to toughen you up, to help you to know how to survive, to help you to do all those things. But there is a cost. There's a cost attached to it, because in those very sort of delicate years of a person growing up, they're not with the people who maybe can help them, deal with some of the angst that comes with that time. Yeah. And then I think also too, because the mother herself has been abandoned or feels abandoned, she almost, that's her survival, is that she needs to abandon her daughter to get to what she needs to do for herself.
Right. Hence what happens, right?
Yeah.
She goes away, and then, well, I don't want to give away the novel.
Yeah.
Read it. But, the other thing, and this is, the psychologist in me, I can't help it. But I think that the value here is how you are able to portray these important aspects of the human emotion. For instance, the way I see the relationship with the father and the mother is what in psychology we call ambiguous grief, which is this grief that, the person is alive, but untouchable. So we go through ambiguous grief with a divorce, with any form of separation, right? There is this total disconnection, but then you know that the person is breathing and existing. So that to me, it comes out so clearly that there are parts of the novel that I feel, I do poetry therapy, and part of what we do is kind of dissect, look for pieces, literary pieces that can awaken a recognition in people, that they can read it and say, I know that. Right, to elicit kind of a sympathetic resonance. So when I read some of the parts of the book, I was like, oh my God, this is ambiguous grief. And then, do you agree with me? Like, is it okay for me to use it like that?
First of all, absolutely. And secondly, I'm like, you're making me sound so smart. No, I wasn't thinking of that, but I do think it's funny because it's something that I have been pondering just in general. This idea of what happens when you lose contact with someone, with a friend, that, there's a rupture. And like you're saying, it's a grief that we don't, I guess maybe you talk about it because you are a psychologist, but it's something that socially, we don't often really delve into how painful it is when a friendship is broken.
Right.
And there is but we don't have like a system in place to mourn those kinds of things, right? Like if a person dies, there's a whole mourning ritual that surrounds it. But what happens, like you're saying, and so I love that you're a professional, so I'm glad you do have that, and I want to learn more about this idea of ambiguous grief.
Yeah. Well, it's very clearly demarcated in your book. So we can definitely talk. And it comes more real when she goes to New York. It's like the father is a stranger, then the siblings there are strangers too, the father's wife. So this kid is like in this environment with people, and the same thing. Oops, I'm giving away a lot. But a lot of her encounters are that where people are there, but they're unreachable. Emotional. And even her mom, Felicia, is like, sort of like she doesn't know how to love. So she loves through doing. So there is so much here. So our cultures, yours and mine, are, of course, intertwined. So I am not surprised to find so many familiar references. I was cracking up when I read about the applauding of landing. Because that's us. Or the idea of a boy's hands spoiling a girl's body. I mean, that was the litany, that I will hear. So this idea, right, that this kid is playing a video game, and that was her sentence, like that was the reason, right, of the exile that she was. So, but I was laughing at the fact that you use your novel. I think what sets it apart is that you use these, let's call it trivial elements, as antecedents to what I see as ambiguous grief. And that's the beauty. Like, okay, yes, I know that we do these things. But then the next place you take me is a very deep place. It's not just that the mother was harsh and like, no, there is a lot here. So how does he feel now? You said that you didn't know, but so how does he feel now to know that you put words to these, these emotions and feelings that are so important for people to have words for.
I mean, actually, it makes me grateful that, that it has that resonance. It also makes me teary because I think about so many, there's so many layers of pain that, like, I mean, everybody in the world walks around with some sort of wound.
Yeah.
And the unconscious ways that we pass these wounds on. So
Yes.
it makes me sad for just thinking about that. But I like, but I'm glad that what I'm grateful about is that I had the opportunity to depict this, because I know that I remember growing up, there were so many instances of, our parents were immigrants, they were hardworking, and there were so many things they were dealing with that we, of course, as children had no insight into. And I remember one of the refrains amongst all of, my aunties and uncles, the family friends, was like, if you misbehave, we're going to send you to, Ghana. And just, it gives me a lot of empathy for them, and and especially now that I'm older and I can imagine what it's like to leave your home country, come to the United States, struggle in New York City, raise kids that you don't really understand because they are becoming Americanized and you're from a different culture. And so I just feel overwhelmed with sort of empathy for them, and also empathy for the children that we were. But there was also lots of good things.
A lot of beauty. That is true.
Yeah.
But in terms of helping people, navigate these things, when I find a novel like yours, and even Blue, a children's story that I can actually use, like the page that I asked you to read is perfectly a piece that we can use with helping grown-ups articulate some of the hurt, some of the the historical wounds that we carry. So again, the beauty though, because your books are not, they're not like psychological, that we can't even call it psychological. What is the term? Your intention is not to do that, but you are able to name things that are important for us to know, and to do it with the beauty and sophistication that a writer should have and should.
Thank you.
Um,
Thank you.
it's not,
I think for me, my goal is to just try to be as truthful as possible, or as truthful as I know how to be. And I think that sometimes, especially with books for young people, there's the idea that you have to, speak, even when you're talking to children, people think they have to like change the sound of their voice and, dumb themselves down. And I know that when I was a kid, I gravitated towards adult things. I wanted to hear what the adults were talking about. And I understood a lot of things, even though I didn't maybe understand I didn't have the experience to sort of contextualize, but I understood what some things were happening. And so I think with Blue, I really thought kids should know this about the color that they pick up from their crayon box. Not so that they can feel that this is a negative thing, I don't want to use the color blue because there's brutality attached to it, but rather that life is full of wonder, and life is also full of, there's a balance with everything. Absolutely. And knowing this history, to me, I think it should one, give you an appreciation for the fact that you have this color in your hand, because we sometimes get so disconnected from production. especially in Western culture, because everything is in the store. You pick it up and you use it and you don't even think about where it came from. But I also think that it gives you an appreciation for where it came from, but it also gives you an appreciation for what you can do with it and what can come next. Because these are the things that happened behind us. What are we going to do with it now?
Yeah, yeah. So yes, definitely the job, I think part of the moral obligation of a respectful writer, again, is to find these universal themes and say it in a way that is still fascinating, but that is conveying, and you achieve that in these two books that we are saying. Another familiar theme in the novel is the idea of cultural shock, right? Like, oh my God, the poor kid is like, she experiences in all fronts, right? When she goes to Ghana, and then she's the outsider among her own people there, then coming back home. And the culture, the home culture, has been shifted. So she's in shock there, and she has to go to that process. Then we know another commotion happens. So she's forced to grow. Where I'm going with that question, do you remember how was that process of writing the young Lila? Let's say, right, she was in the cusp of puberty, and then she turns into an adolescent, teenage. What was that process? Because one of the things, again, you do these without falling into stereotypical descriptions. It's not boring. So what was that process for you? Do you remember when you said, okay, the kid is growing, and things that happened to her? Like,
yeah, I just tried, like I said, I just tried to be true to the process of like growing up as a girl. Like, there are things that happen to us as girls that are like, you get your period, and it's so uncomfortable because it's like, wait a minute, like 1 minute I'm like, I think especially with a girl, you go from, I don't know, just being a kid to suddenly like my breasts are growing, and you feel so self-conscious, and you feel uncomfortable talking about it. It feels taboo to talk about it with people, and in school it's giggled about, and also it's like, oh, this person has big boobs, I don't have my boobs yet. Like, there's so many things that are going on. And so I wanted to I feel like when you're at that weird age, and I shouldn't call it weird, when you're at that sensitive age where your body is changing, and that's where Lila is. And then her world is like changing cataclysmically, not once, like, as but sort of multiple shifts are happening as she's having all of these shifts internally. Puberty, adolescence. I think I just wanted to just honor the fact that, like, there's something. I wanted to honor the fact that in this specific universe of this girl's life, she's put in situations where she does not have control of her life. And it's incredibly destabilizing for her. And it's uncomfortable for her while she's going through all of the sort of discomfort of puberty. But what happens is she, for better or for worse, is forced to find an anchor for herself and a center for herself that, the book ends, but I like to believe that ultimately she grows into a person that has a center that can't really be toppled, because she's gone through this unfortunate sort of like dizzying shifts at one of the most sensitive times in her life.
Right.
And she will have issues because, you know, this is traumatic, but I think in the end, she is going to emerge as a very strong person.
And that I get from the beginning. And one of the things I recently interviewed Stephanie Feta, who wrote the book Shaming into Brown, and she works a lot with embodiment and somatics, and the way she does it, like she goes through literary books and kind of teases apart these things. So that it was fascinating to talk to her because that's part of what I pay attention myself. So, this interview was recently, and then I was reading your novel, and of course, I was like looking for these things. So again, talking about, and I want you to hear me because I think this is something so beautiful that you did. As I said before, you highlight social injustices here very well. And you do it through very innovative means. The somatics, as I just said, is just there from the beginning. This kid, this itch in her armpits, like, oh my goodness, right? Is directing me to so much. But who will think about like only Nana that she gets this itch on her armpit that follows her, right? So there is this somatic awareness that is there, that is so vivid, right? So we immediately, from the beginning, when she's at the airport and she's getting this thing, right? We know that something is it's at odds here. That's first. You're not telling us that. You're just telling us that the kid gets this itch in her armpit. Then you go through this idea of the guys with the body odor, right?
Yeah.
But then you don't leave it there. It goes to the water. Who gets the water? Who has access? So that's what I'm saying. Like it's not like we are reading a boring political, statements. It's like talking about show, don't tell. That's what you do, right?
Wow. Thank you. Thank you for that.
Oh, but tell me more, because the thing about the water and the bodies and the pestilence, and even there is a part where that connects, or you connected to God. So what is that? Can you tell us more about the process of defeating social injustice
Yeah.
without becoming predictable?
Yeah. Well, for me, so the book was inspired by, my own experience going to secondary school in Ghana. And the school that I went to had a major water crisis.
Mhm.
And this water crisis became sort of, a canvas that exposed the, class of each of the students, because if you came from a family that could afford to transport water from the capital city to the school that we went to, then you had water, and the water was padlocked in the headmistress's or the assistant headmistress's house. And I mean, so right there you had water. But then there was, if you didn't have water, there was theft.
Mhm.
And so there was, it was a very complex situation. And I thought to myself, when I was going through it, I didn't fully understand, like, okay, water, why isn't the water flowing the way it flows in the United States, but when I was writing the book, I was thinking a lot about how, like, something like this, that again, because growing up in New York, I had some idea because my parents are from Ghana, and there were certain things that we did that made me understand the connection between like, oh, these things don't just pop up on a shelf.
Mhm.
However, when I was in Ghana, I was really confronted by the fact that, whoa, like every single thing that I took for granted was not something that you could take for granted. You had to work for everything. And so this idea of bringing up the fact that this girl who had come from the UK, she, had all of these sort of creature comforts at her disposal, even though she wasn't from a wealthy background. And then she goes to Ghana, and she is now thrust into a situation where something like water is not something that she can take for granted. And it exposes her to these class differences, and it exposes her to what would you do when you have to survive? Because I think that it's very easy to kind of look from the outside and say like, oh, look what those poor people are doing to themselves, or look what's happening in that poor country. But when you are in that situation where you are thirsty and you need to drink water, or if then you're going to do crazy things. And I remember like when we were all at night, we would padlock our buckets to the bed and pour Dettol and put period panties in the water just so that no one would steal it. And still people would steal the water. And then we would steal. I would go at night. I'm like, I'm running low. I don't know when my grandmother's coming. Late at night, I would go with my cup and my bucket and would just steal. And it was just, you don't know what you will do unless you're in that situation where you have to survive. So it was, I wanted that in there for that.
Right. But again, what amazes me is the way in which you thread these things through the narrative in a way that is not, of course, doesn't give me the sense, oh, I'm just reading a pamphlet, bringing conscious awareness to this or that. It's pure beauty. There is a lot of poetry in your book. So in both of them. So I thank you for writing them. And what's next for Nana?
Thank you so much. Well, I just finished editing an anthology of African and diaspora voices. It's called Relations, and I love it. It's just writers from all over the continent contributed stories, essays, and poems. So I think it's a really cool kind of, very cool examination of relationships of all kinds, relations with family members, relations with yourself, there's infidelity, corruption, all of it. It's really cool, and I'm so proud of it. And then I'm also working on a novel, and I'm excited about that one too. And it's funny because you, as you were talking about Powder Necklace, I'm like, wow, the themes keep recurring, intergenerational trauma, but in a way that I think is interesting, hopefully.
We have to write it until we feel that we have said it all.
Yeah.
It's time for another theme. Is there anything I have not asked that you think is important for the audience to know about you, and other than you're an awesome human being? And what did I not? Is there any?
I feel like you said it all, and you brought tears to my eyes, because I'm like, wow, that's so cool that you saw all of those things. I think sometimes as writers, and this, we create what's on our heart and what we believe is good, and then we release it, and it has its own, it has its own relationship to you, the reader, and it has its own life. And so it's incredibly gratifying that, you were blessed by both books.
Mhm.
And yeah, it just gives me the encouragement to keep going, because you know it's hard. The Powder Necklace came out in the year 2010. So that's 12 years ago, and there's been so much rejection in between, and so I've gone through a lot of questioning of myself, and then sort of come to the other side, like, no, this is still who I am, this is still what I do. And it's funny because Blue kind of came about while I was experiencing so much rejection with my second novel, and this book was just such a delight. I was able to connect to something that fascinated me, and the fact that it's out before my novel just makes me so happy, and it makes me laugh that this journey is just, you just got to stay on the road, you know? So
well, I'm looking forward to doing more with you and Blue, as I had said. So we'll see. We are going to put something and bring you to Connecticut to do something. But thank you so much for joining me. And thank you all for listening to What a Word is Worth. You can access today's interview at Anchor, YouTube, and other platforms. And if you found our program beneficial in any way, if you found something helpful, let us know. Subscribe to the channel, and also leave us a review. I am with you in love and compassion always, always, always.